We are so thrilled that you guys have chosen Victims and Villains to check out our spooky coverage of this year's Sundance. While Sundance isn't typically looked at as a horror film festival, there are some significant gems, and we're about to find out if Nanny is one of those gems. Welcome to Victims and Villains. If you guys are new to our content, we create content like what you're watching right now, simply to educate and engage individuals like yourself on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. My name's Captain Nostalgia. I have the privilege of being a writer, podcaster, and events coordinator here. If you guys would like more information about what Victims and Villains does, their podcasts, movie reviews like this one, our mental health resource library, and links to our socials, just click the links in the descriptions below. Nanny is the feature film debut from Nikyatu Jusu. She is no stranger to the Festival of Sundance. In fact, her short film, Suicide by Sunlight, which we will provide in the link to descriptions below for you guys to check out, also made its debut a few years ago. With this debut, she tells the story of an immigrant mother who is trying to raise up enough money to actually bring her son to the United States to start a new life for him through a nanny job. Unfortunately, at this nanny job, she actually starts to get a little bit underappreciated, but also starts to have a bit of a psychological breakdown. I'm going to start this review off by putting a caveat that this movie, I will just show my hands early, this movie didn't quite hit it for me, but I'm also going to put the caveat here that it didn't hit for me because I'm not a parent. I can't relate to any of the characters that are going through this, and that happens. Sometimes you go to watch a movie and the movie just doesn't quite connect with you. And that's fine. That just means that I'm not the intended audience for this movie. So if you guys end up just being like, all right, well, he's not the guy that I should probably be looking for, I understand turning off this review and going to check out someone else. With that said, though, I will say that this movie has terrific performances. Anna Diop, who most people might actually know as Starfire from HBO Max's Titans, stars as the lead mother in this film, and I honestly will say that this is probably the best performance I've seen of her. I have been a fan of Titans. We've covered the first 2 seasons on the podcast, which you can get wherever you get your podcasts from. But this is kind of the first time that I've ever actually seen what she's capable of as an actress. She's not really pulling off the energy of an ensemble. This is her front and center. And honestly, this movie lives and dies with her, and it is so rewarding to kind of get to see what she is capable of as an actress. Much like I was talking about in my coverage of the other Sundance Film Festival selection that we have done so far with Resurrection, that film really lived and breathed thanks to Rebecca Hall, and similarly, this movie also lives and breathes because of Anna Diop. Diop gives a wonderful performance in this. She's very gripping, she's very charismatic, but also at the same time she's able to lend brilliantly into the more psychological aspects of this movie. That said, let's talk about the horror aspects of this movie. If you guys are just following our Sundance coverage, we're approaching Sundance kind of differently than some other outlets are. We are primarily only looking at the horror and or sci-fi selections that this year's festival is offering. As far as the horror aspect of this goes, it doesn't quite hit in the way that it should. I mean, maybe I'm missing something, and maybe there's a detail about being a parent or being responsible for a child that I'm just not being able to connect to. Some of the more nightmarish elements of Diop's character that she inevitably goes through towards the second half of this movie. I will say, as the writer and director of this movie, Jusu definitely does do atmosphere really well. There's a lot of underlining Easter eggs that are set up throughout the first act of the movie that make some of the more horrific events in the second and third acts of the movie hit really well. The reason I would say even looking at this film is for its social commentary. I will say though that while this movie might not necessarily land for me connecting to it as a male who doesn't have any kids, but and it also at the same time the psychological thriller aspects slash horror aren't really there for me. I will say the social commentary is very strong with this. Nanny speaks very deeply to how this country treats not only immigrants but also minorities. Some of the character exchanges between Diop and fellow co-star Michelle Monaghan, who plays her boss in this, are truly uncomfortable to watch. The movie conveys very well how immigrants that might find themselves in similar lines of work and the quote-unquote American employers, how that work relationship really is flawed, because we kind of think we can kind of sometimes think of these individuals as second-class citizens. And while this film doesn't necessarily work as a horror movie, this film definitely draws the emotions deep for its protagonist. And there are several times that I found myself within this film just broken by this character's journey because of just how just she's treated throughout. And ultimately where her character ends up in the end it's heartbreaking. Coming back to the horror aspects, while I won't necessarily say in narrative form that they don't necessarily work, visually they do. The visual aspects of this are very well received, and perhaps if I had the opportunity to sit down with Jusu, I might feel a little bit differently about how the horror is handled throughout the course of this, because there have been times in the past where I've found myself not really connecting to a horror movie, and then I sit down with the writer, the director, or someone that had a hand in crafting the story and the vision for that film and had a brand new appreciation for it. Also, second viewings help too. So who knows? I mean, this could completely my score that I'm going to dive into in just a few moments could completely change upon a second viewing. And honestly, there's a lot of textured commentary throughout the course of this film, and as primarily its second and third acts that deal with water and rebirth and kind of also like a disconnect almost. I don't want to spoil too much because a lot of the imagery does divulge into spoiler territories. That said, it's very effective and it creates a good atmosphere, even if it doesn't always land narratively. So alright, I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to give this one a 2.5 out of 5. There, again, I'm going to preface it with saying that for me, I'm not the right audience for this movie very clearly. This movie is saying a lot that I just couldn't connect to emotionally. However, I will say, with that said, the reason why the score is landing so low as it is also because of its use of horror. But it's a solid film with a solid social commentary, great performances, and a heartbreaking narrative. And much like fellow selection Resurrection, this one also too does not have a worldwide release date as of yet, so make sure that you guys are continuing to follow us on social media. That way we'll keep you guys up to date with when this film hits. And as far as a mental health moment for this movie, side note, if you guys are new to our content, mental health moment is where we take a theme of mental health and we pull it out of the expand upon it for a few minutes. I don't even want to try to it. I really want this film to kind of speak for itself, for one. For two, I believe representation matters, and as a American citizen, not an immigrant, not a minority, and not a parent, I feel like I am not qualified to speak on the emotional and mental health states of these characters. So I'm just going to say, check out this movie and check out our mental health resource library. But I will also say that if you guys would like to hear us diving into these issues with Black men and women, creators of all kinds, whether they're filmmakers, podcasters, so on and so forth, we'll provide our Celebration of Diversity series in the descriptions below, along with a link to our Black Lives Matter series. Make sure that you guys hit the subscribe button below, and make sure that you guys keep following us, because we have a few more selections that we're going to be talking about with you guys from this year's Sundance Film Fest. And also, we're going to be talking to you guys about one of our favorite festivals, the Berlin Final Girls Film Festival. So make sure that you guys stay tuned and have a good day.